So hi everyone, thank you so much for attending today's webinar on a Friday. I'm really happy to be introducing today's speaker, Dr. Jackie Ashby. She's presenting today with support from the CG's RTV program and the gender platform. So it's really a privilege to have her speak to the RTV Foods community today, as I'm sure you all agree. So Jackie is former Director of Research at CIAT, also former Senior Advisor for Gender Research at the CG System Office, and currently is a consultant supporting the RTB program. So today, Jackie will be speaking to us about the G+ tools, as Eglantine has explained, which were developed under the RTB Gender and Breeding Initiative. But before she begins, I just want to draw your attention to a few points that emphasize the importance of her presentation and the research that Work Package 1 has done and how important it is for RTB Foods' success. If you could change slides, please. So way back in 2017, if we remember, the RTV Foods Partnership began, and we put together quite a fantastic proposal for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So here we made a really explicit commitment to developing RTB varieties that meet user preferred quality traits to increase adoption and the impact of improved RTB varieties. We also described that Work Package 1 research would enable RTB breeders to develop gender-responsive breeding priorities through variety profiles. So this was in page 1 of the proposal. So, and this is what the G+ tools are all about. It's about adoption. It's about making a product that people want, and this is people that consist of half the population. It isn't a tick box exercise, it's not a side project, but really a key core part of the entire project. So it's incredibly important. If you could change slides, please. So as many of you are aware, we have slightly adapted the G+ product profile tool for the RTB Foods purposes. So what we're calling this new tool is the G+ Food Product Profile tool. And this tool will assess each characteristic that we have for its gender impact to inform what is included in the Work Package 1 food product profile. And this tool is applied after the profile is created by the multidisciplinary team. Next slide, please. So finally, I'll pass over to Jackie soon, but I just wanted to mention that the gender working group with RTV Foods has been absolutely instrumental in this, in making a number of suggestions and comments on the tool to make it applicable to their experience and their research findings that they've had during the last few years. So some of the changes that we've made just quickly is really including a focus on characteristics, because at our stage, we're not exactly sure if they're going to be genetic traits, to focus on products, to focus on processing characteristics and food consumption and resource use. So I just want to thank you all in the Gender Working Group for your enthusiasm to continue to input and use these tools. So I really appreciate it. And with that, I will welcome Jackie to the virtual stage. Jackie, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Hope you can hear me now. I'll just put my video on for a minute to say hello. There's many friends here I like to greet, and then we'll get started. So let me turn off the video here, just a minute. I think I should do that. All right. So what was that? Sorry, I'm trying to get my slide to go down. There we go. All right. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the G Food Product Profile tool. And my apologies to those of you who've just been in the GREAT course, because you're going to have seen some of these slides before. I'm certainly not going to teach you how to use the tool, but you've done 90% of the work already. From what I hear in your work package 1, you've got the information to hand, and what this tool does, as I'll explain in a little bit more detail, is help you to organize that information so you can apply it. So I'm going to talk briefly about what the tools are for, just give you an example of really why we have this tool, which is to get us to dig down a little bit beyond the simple preferences of I like this variety, I don't, or I think thick peel is important, or I don't. And then I'll cover the 3 steps in the tool. So just a quick moment on what the tools are for. And people often ask, why did you develop this tool? And if I'm honest, I have to say that this was a point in my professional life where I was sick and tired of talking about gender, to be honest, and particularly of trying to persuade people that it was important, but never being able to go to sort of concretely, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And that was particularly true in the plant breeding community, where plant breeders could say, or food scientists, or even agronomists could say, yeah, I get it, gender's important, you know, it makes a difference in our impact, but I work with plants, what am I going to do about it? And these tools were developed because we wanted to have a really simple way, more or less equivalent to what you would do if you went out to the field and looked at an experimental plot and scored it for, let's say, resistance to thrips. Something really simple where you could boil things down to a number, but a number that requires, of course, you know, a very sophisticated judgment and a lot of research evidence behind it. But this really does try to boil things down to help make decisions about the who and the what in variety design. So these are decision support tools, and they have a series of steps for organizing information. And at the end of the day, you should come out with a judgment on an individual plant trait, which says, stop, you know, there's a risk, it's a traffic light system. There's a risk of overlooking an important gender inequality. Take care, there are some ambiguous gender equality outcomes. You might have to look at the pluses and minuses of a trait, or you're good to go. It's gender neutral, or there are beneficial outcomes possible. And the purpose of the tool is not to get you to do gender responsive breeding, or to breed, or to design a food product in quotes for women. It's the purpose of it is it's like a health check. You want to be able to, if the donor says, do you know what the gender implications are? You want to be able to say, yes, we've done that check and we're good to go, right? We know there's nothing in this particular variety that is going to cause a problem for the user. So it's a little bit like a health check. Okay, so if you use this tool, you should be able to see in a product profile, if that's what you're using. You should have some very simple place where you can record for each trait that you're considering in your product profile, the characteristics that you want to avoid if you don't want to risk making gender inequalities worse. For example, are you going to cause people, women in particular, to have to do more drudgery? You don't want to do that. Those to include if you'd like to maximize your chances of making women better off. That's being gender responsive. Those that involve a trade-off from a gender perspective. Maybe the cassava root's harder to peel, which is not a good thing, but on the other hand, the starch is much denser and much more desirable, and there's a trade-off there. And different people will benefit, depending on which way you go with it. And then finally, those that don't have any evident bias in favor women or men. They're gender neutral. So what the tool does is it assesses 4 aspects of gender equality. There are many, many aspects of gender equality. I'm sure you've heard people involved in gender research telling you how location and culture specific it is and how complex it is, and that all remains very true. But what the tool tries to do is to check like 4 critical things that can contribute to gender inequality. It's a bit like saying, you know, I'm going to check your blood pressure, your weight, your cholesterol, and, you know, one other thing. We don't check everything, but these are the ones that we're going to look at. So the first is the use of unpaid family labor. That's a very critical issue for gender inequality, because guess who's doing most of the work on the farm? Control over the use of critical on-farm resources. That's very often unequal, particularly if women are cultivating their own plots. They're in a long queue to get the land prepared or to get some extra help on the plot. They may not get a visit from I know I'll move on to that in the next one, but there are different levels of control over critical resources on the farm. Access to critical external inputs. Women may not get a visit from the extension agent. They may not be able to get credit. And then there's the issue of control over sharing the benefits, particularly the case if it's the man's job to sell the crop and the woman doesn't always get a share of the proceeds. That's sort of a fair deal in terms of the amount of work she's put into the crop. So we're going to look at those 4 issues. But before I get into the tool, I want to go over an example with you. And this is drawn from some of Bella's work, one of his papers. And the basic situation is that we have, in one region of Nigeria, local women processors, and then men who are principally growers and traders. And the men, and these 2 groups of people, the growers and traders and the local women processors, they agree about some traits, yield and higher starch. They both have very positive opinions about that, but they had quite opposite opinions about the proposal that the shelf life should be or improved shelf life should be a breeding objective. And the question is, what reasons might there be for this difference? And what I want to emphasize here is the importance of getting under the skin of these preferences and asking, what's the underlying gender inequality that's being expressed? And to do that, you have to dig down a little bit and understand that, oh, okay, the men who are traders are expanding their sales to distant cities, but the women who are local processors are fearful that if the flow of fresh cassava out of the village and out of the small towns is increasing, that they're going to face higher prices for raw material. So what really is going on there is the underlying gender inequality that excuse me, underpins these 2 opposing preferences is that the gender norms that allow men mobility, access to transportation, cell phones, that women don't have, and women can't easily trade in the distant but profitable urban fresh markets. And you might say, as one does with many of these underlying gender inequalities, well, it's not my problem as a breeder. What can I do about that underlying gender inequality? But the point is that we're trying to flag these, and something that breeding can do is to find out what improvement of the crop is a priority for local women processors. And if that's something that breeding can respond to, then you have an opportunity for being more gender responsive. So that sort of gives you an idea of what the intention of the tool is. It's not to sort of dictate any kind of response on the part of breeding, but it's just to kind of use it as a traffic light and say, okay, there's an underlying gender inequality here. Well, maybe we could take a second look at that trait and think about something else that might be a higher and more gender responsive priority. So now I'm going to go on through the steps in the G+ food product profile. I would normally stop here and ask for questions, but I think what I'll do, because this is a very short presentation, and I hope Laura's keeping an eye on the time for me, what I'll do is just keep going and we'll have the questions at the end. So the G+ product profile tool is essentially has 3 steps. One in which you gather information, and I would reiterate again, I think you in the work package 1 have done all, or if not more than enough work for that step in the tool. Then there's an analysis stage where you do 2 pieces of analysis for each characteristic in your product profile. So for a characteristic like high starch or easy to peel, you would do a do no harm analysis and a positive benefit analysis. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you're going to score those 2 analyses, and you again end up with 2 gender impact scores for each trait, and that will essentially give you your traffic warning light: stop, take care, or go. So looking first at the information stage, as I said, you've done a great deal of this work. It involves having a product profile with a list of traits. You need that list of traits to start from, because we're going to evaluate each trait individually. You need an analysis of gender gaps, and you need some information on trait preferences. So at this point, to apply the tool, you must know who the customer is. You must have a well-defined customer segment. It's not very helpful to apply this tool if you're saying vaguely, oh, you know, everybody in sub-Saharan Africa who grows cassava. You need a more specific and well-defined customer segment than that. But it can still be small-scale cassava growers in Nigeria, which gives you a context in terms of the gender relations that you're going to use for this analysis. And as I've said, you must have an idea of the product and its characteristics, ideally from a product profile. And what we're going to do with the tool is assess each product characteristic using the questionnaire, and you're going to run each trait through this questionnaire. Now, something that does happen on occasions is, this has happened in the case of lentils, the characteristic comes up that's not on the list in the product profile. I think in their case it was pod shattering. Turned out that pod shattering was a major issue for people who are doing manual harvesting of lentil, and it got added to at least to the list of traits deserving consideration. So things may come up. So to complete the questionnaire, which has 12 questions, you need an analysis of gender relations in the customer segment that give you an insight into the 4 dimensions of gender inequality that I mentioned before: labor, control over productive resources, access to inputs, and control over benefits or benefit sharing. And then it's desirable, it's not indispensable, but it's desirable to have some information on sex disaggregated trait preferences. And the reason this is included in the questionnaire is because the first set of questions require you to use your evidence, your research evidence on gender equality and gender relations, and make a judgment. This is not an opinion, it's a judgment. But your information may be incomplete, or it may be flawed, and the trait preference is there as a check. So if you come out through the analysis that says, ooh, warning light, you know, this trait might not be a go, but your trait preferences tell you that men and women, everybody who's been consulted about it in maybe the PVS trials, everybody says this is great, then it's a warning, it's a check on whether your analysis might be a little bit off track, and vice versa. Okay, and Laura wants to highlight here that the data that you need are already available in the Work Package 1 studies. So the questionnaire is worded for an assessment from the generic perspective of women. And there's absolutely nothing sacred about the word women in this tool. You can substitute men for women, so you could, and you probably should, if you want to be thorough, you should do the same analysis at a minimum for the men in the customer segment. And one of the reasons for that is because these generic terms, men and women, they're useful, but they are also a little bit dangerous. And you could very well find that you have results from a PVS trial or from a survey that tell you that the very poor, in the very poor households, men and women agree, and they have a different opinion from women and men in wealthy households. And in that case, you might want to discriminate between those two groups when you use this tool. So there's nothing sacred about the word women in the questionnaire, and it's up to you to decide what the social group is that you're applying it to. You just make the substitution. So you complete the questionnaire for the two aspects, do no harm and positive benefits. I'll talk about those in a minute. The questionnaire asks for an evidence-based judgment. Ideally, it's made by a social scientist who's got their head around the gender analysis, and a breeder or a food scientist who understands what the sort of technical dimensions of the characteristic are, and would work together through those 12 questions. And as I've said, it's applied to each characteristics that's proposed for the food product profile. I think the important point here is this is not a questionnaire that you can go through and say, what's my opinion? Yes. What's my opinion? Don't know. Tick, tick, tick. No. The questionnaire is intended to help you organize what is probably a massive amount of very complicated research information and boil it down into this sort of traffic warning system. So each question in the questionnaire may very well require you to go away and do a bit of research, in the sense of, oh, I know we did that survey in 2019. I want to go and check the results of that and see what it says. So it's that kind of a questionnaire. In the analysis, I think we're going to, I'm going to explain do no harm and positive benefit analysis here. Those are the two branches. Yes, and here we can get into the questionnaire. So do no harm, basically the idea here is that you don't really want a variety to be released that the user is going to say, hang on a minute, when this is fermented for a long time, it turns brown. I don't like it. Or you don't, and it causes me to do a heck of a lot more work than I would otherwise have to do with a different variety. So that the purpose of do no harm is, at a minimum, let's avoid releasing varieties or designing products that have some undesirable trait that's going to lead to a lack of acceptance. And the do no harm branch of the questionnaire will look at drudgery, or the use of unpaid labor, because this is a particularly sensitive issue. It'll look at whether activities or control of productive resources on the farm are displaced, unequal access to input and control over benefits. And as I've said, it includes a check for negative trait preferences. Let's just look at an example here. This is question 1.
Apologies, Jackie, just to say that you've got just under 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, good. So this is do no harm, drudgery. The question is there in the first column: does the characteristic involve a harmful increase of unpaid labor? And then there are different levels of scoring. And as I've said, this is a judgment based on research evidence. An example that I often give for this is the varieties. There are varieties of wheat, millet, sorghum, all of which are aiming to be short-strawed. And there are many examples where women who are responsible for feeding the small livestock would rather have a long-strawed variety, and they can object to those short straw varieties if they increase their labor burden. So you have an important point here about recording the data, because you may have quality issues. You may find that there isn't enough data to make the judgment, in which case the tool asks you to record that and to make a narrative explanation so that somebody else can read your responses and understand why you've scored -2, -1, or 0 in the case of do no harm. The positive benefit analysis, it's the mirror image of do no harm. So it looks at those same 4 issues, but from a positive aspect. Let me illustrate that by looking at the question. This is a different question in the questionnaire. It asks, can the characteristic maintain or increase waged employment? That is, employment that's going to generate income. And an example of this is the one in Malawi, where women who sell the leaf sauce from cassava, no, it's from cowpea and cassava, they valued positively the edible leaves. So that was something that they wanted to see maintained in the new varieties. So having gone through 12 questions in the G+ questionnaire, you get to scoring. I'm not going to go into scoring here. There's a scoring guide. It's a logic of scoring. It's not math. And quite honestly, in my experience, you can often deduce the traffic light conclusion from doing the questionnaire without even going through the scoring. But the scoring guide is it walks you through the logical steps in scoring for do no harm and for positive benefit. And so you will end up with 2 scores, which could be one of the red ones, where you say red light, the characteristic should not be pursued, or 1, -1, take care, this is something to think about. Maybe the variety release, maybe if we're going to release something that's hard to peel, but that's just the trade-off is such that we're not going to do anything about that. We should make sure that there's a mechanical peeling that's accessible to the poorest and most deprived processors, something like that. Or in the case of soybeans that were difficult to shell, or ground nuts, then there was a big effort to get a small-scale mechanical thresher out. you could come out with the 0 score of neutral. You know, you're good to go. There's nothing positive or negative in terms of gender responsiveness. Or you might have a result which says, it says required. What that means, there's a terrific opportunity here to do something in the product design that's very beneficial or potentially beneficial. And then there are different levels going down to nice to have. So those are the 2 types of score that you can have. Now, you might ask, why does a characteristic have 2 scores? And ideally, you're going to have and I understand you will have a place in a form to fill these in. The reason you have 2 scores is because any characteristic can have a plus and a minus. It can have a positive side and a negative side, because when you are putting a characteristic into a product, when you're deciding the characteristics of the product, you're deciding to benefit one type of customer over another very often. Some characteristic, everybody loves them. Some characteristics are a plus for some people and a minus for others. And what the tool does is says, take a look at that. So that's why you are maintaining 2 scores there. But you have to assess the trade-offs between 2 conflicting scores, because it's a judgment. It's a judgment call. And the tool does not dictate the outcome to you. So I hope I've got to the end here within my time limit. This is just to summarize again where you want to come out if you use this tool. It shouldn't involve a great deal of extra time. You've done 90% of the work, but hopefully if you do apply it, it will help you to synthesize that wealth of gender research into something that the breeder or the food scientist can take a look at the product profile, and even if it's just out of the corner of your eye, you can notice that, okay, great, this has a 0 or a good to go, positive benefit in the gender impact score, or just a minute, there's something here I might want to pay attention to because it's got a -2 in the do no harm column. So let me stop there. Thanks for listening to me. And I'm going to go back to you, Laura, I think, to field any questions. Is that right? Or moderate questions?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Jackie. That was brilliant. And I'll probably, Eglantine, did you want to moderate for us?
It's up to you, Laura, if you wish.
I'm happy either way. Yeah. So, does anyone have any comments or experiences or questions that they would like to share or to ask of Jackie? We're getting some very positive comments in the chat box.
There's some questions here.
That's right. So one from Benjamin, NRCRI, who really, they're working on 4 RTB product profiles, really fantastic work. So what Benjamin is asking, Benjamin, do you want to ask your question directly? It's about weighted averages.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Ashby. Yeah, I noticed the use of scores, minus and the pluses, in terms of how intense the desirability of such trait might be for the respondent. So I was asking, it seems it has to do with weighting the averages, the positives, benefits, and the do no harms. Probably the do no harms might is possible, and the positive benefits is also possible. So are we looking at a trade-off between these two? If the positive benefits outdo the do no harms, I mean, if the do no harms seems to be insignificant, Does that mean
Yeah.
that such trait can be targeted for breeding?
Yeah, I mean that you've put your finger on it. It is a judgment, and one of the tools that is in the G+ suite, it's a collection which is on the RTV website. You'll find there something called this horrible term, the standard operating procedure. Sounds like a engineering guide, but actually what it is it is advice on how to use the tools in your team, because these judgments, what the tool will do will help you organize and bring evidence to bear, but at the end of the day, and what the standard operating procedure will do, it will say, look, you've reached a point in using this tool where you really would benefit from sitting down, breeders and social scientists together, food scientists together, and making a judgment, because you've put your finger on it. There are pluses and there are minuses. And what you want to avoid is the situation that the CIMMYT maize program ran into when well, this is quite a long time ago now, but they released all over East Africa a hard dent maize, which was much more productive, and the farmers were, thrilled to grow and harvest it. But when it came to trying to pound the maize, it was so hard the women couldn't pound it. And the situation that arose is that the women in the household were telling the men, please do not plant this variety, and they had a real problem with disadoption. So you don't want to get into that situation. But there may be things that come up in the do no harm analysis, which you together you analyze it and you say, no, look, we can live with this. I mean, maybe it is a bit more work to peel it, but we can do something else about that, right? So the thing I would avoid is the word average, because these scores are not real numbers, right? We're giving it a -2. We could have given it a D-, right? These are not real numbers, so you can't add them up and average them, right? So I would, beware of that. They're symbolic, they're nominal, right? So it is a judgment call.
Thank you, Jackie. We've got two very important questions here. One is from Jim Lorenzen, who is our project manager at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He asks, I wondered where drudgery reduction would fall in the do no harm or positive benefits example. So do you want to talk briefly about the kind of mirroring of questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things that one would like to avoid is increasing the amount of drudgery. So in the do no harm, the question is, does the trait increase the amount of unpaid work that women are going to have to do on farm? We know that women are already incredibly overloaded in these resource poor farm households. They're doing incredibly long working days, and even a small increase can be quite harmful in terms of health or the kind of attention that they can give to other caring activities for their children or the older members of the household. So drudgery is in the do no harm side with that name. But when you move to positive benefits, what you want to do is, on the do no harm, you want to check, are we increasing drudgery? In the positive benefits, you want to check, are we decreasing drudgery? So they're sort of the mirror image of each other. One is, are we increasing drudgery? The other is, are we decreasing drudgery? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a great question also from Claire Hershey, a very important question. He thanks you and says it's been very informative presentation, which it has. Are you monitoring and gaining lessons from the programs that have been using the tool?
Yes. Hi, Claire. Nice to be with you. The RTB sweet potato program, cassava, and the bean program in Africa with PABRA are all sort of formally piloting. Also at Akada, it's being tested with lentil and barley. And we're in sort of formally monitoring what's happening with the tools with those programs. They're writing reports and papers. And I mean, it'd be terrific if some of the people who are in the GREAT course go on and use the tool, and hopefully we might develop a way of keeping track of their experiences as well.
I could just add for work package 1, the gender output we have for period 4/5 will be looking at just this, would be looking at our results from using the adapted RTB food product profile tool, the adapted G+tool for RTB food. Deborah Rubin also has a great question. Thanks you again for the presentation. Says it provides a useful organizing framework for so much existing gender-related research, with which I agree with. A question she has is how to assess, for example, the harm of increased labor against the benefit of increased income, and whether hypothetically the benefit could be amplified with the use of different technologies.
Yeah, so how to assess the harm of increased labor. You know, there was a period in the 90s where people were doing a lot of time allocation studies, and you could go and find this sort of information very easily, and they seem to have dropped out of fashion. But a lot of the breeding programs are using this methodology called participatory varietal selection, which I'm a great fan of. And they are using it in a more and more sophisticated way, in the sense that they're sampling so that they make sure that the information is representative, and they're including a socioeconomic component to the varietal selection, which is essentially asking farmers what their opinion is of a cross-section of varieties. I mean, I think if you can go to the customer and get an assessment from their point of view, and you can give them some sort of practical sense of what the variety is like, if they can thresh it or weed it in an on-farm trial, that's probably your best bet, because this is all judgment. We're not probably going to have the data or the time to run sophisticated economic models. But I mean, if you have the data, you could do that. And then, so I don't know, I guess I'm saying it sort of depends on your data, but there are methods and practices in place that can help to make that assessment. And then whether the benefit could be amplified with the use of different technologies. I mean, I think that's the whole issue of looking at a trait and its potentially negative aspects and asking, well, shall we make sure that when we release this, we're in a partnership with the National Extension Program or some sort of non-profit organization that's going to have a program of, let's say, small fertilizer packages that go out at the same time as the seed. So, you know, again, it's definitely an option. The idea of the tool is to make you think that through, you know, in advance, rather early in the process than late. I hope I've answered your question, Deborah.
Okay, thanks for that. So Bella Latikan, who is on the call, he's made an important important point in the chat, which is if there are negative consequences and positive benefits, an interdisciplinary discussion focusing on this trait should take place to decide if the trait is worth breeding for or not. As Jackie says, the scores are not able to be mathematically leveled. I thought that was a good point.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
Yeah. I have a question for you before perhaps we listen to a few people's experiences. If anyone on the call wants to talk about their experience in piloting the G+ tool. But before that, Jackie, I was wondering if you had any advice for us going forward. We're just about, we've made some adaptations to the tool. We might tweak it a bit more for the RTV Foods context. Do you have any advice of things we should keep in mind as we start using this tool?
Well, I would say, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Right? So I would apply it with whatever time you've got available, with whatever data and information you've got available, and just see if it works for you. Right? You don't have to have the perfect amount of data, and you don't have to spend, an enormous amount of time on it. I would say just give it a try, and have a team discussion about the results, and just see if it works for you. And you can always go back and do more work on it if that's what you decide you want to do. But I would say just give it a try, devote a team meeting to the result, and see how it works out.
That's great. I think in the gender working group in the RTV Foods project, we've discussed possibly coming together in small groups to use and apply the tool and kind of talk it through different examples from the research that we're finding. So we hope to be doing that in the next few weeks. Bella, you've just put in a great example from cassava in the chat. Did you want to just speak to it a bit out loud?
Yes,
Better. Yeah.
I can imagine that there is this upcoming concern of it's nice to know that something is beneficial, and then also nice that there are negative consequences. But what would we do? How can we assess which way to go? Because I can even say that we need an interdisciplinary discussion, and that you should not level it with data. But then still breeders are like, okay, what the hell are we supposed to do then? So I think if there's such things come up where you have negative and positive things, they should be zoomed into, and they would require, for example, to assess the roots with processors, so that you can see if the overall benefit is positive or negative. So the example that I wrote down in the chat is really about like ease of peeling, which is also already a complicated trait, because you have to know, is it the thickness of the skin? Is it the ease that the knife slides in the flesh, or is it the ease that the root can be undressed by hand without using a knife? So you have already that complexity. But then also a lot of times ease of peeling is seen as a kind of negative trait by women as well, because it might be an indication that the root is too waterish. So how can you know then if you don't know exactly what kind of type of peeling there is meant, or it's a combination of those three? The only thing you can do is just do a in-village setup and compare those varieties in the working conditions of processors, and compare the varieties that they already use and that they are satisfied with, and then measure all these quantities and see and discuss with them if the overall benefit is there, or there's an overall disadvantage.
Thank you, Bella, for sharing
Yeah,
that.
that's a very good point, Bela. I mean, the tool is not gonna, it's a decision support tool. It's not gonna make the decisions for you. And some of those decisions between the pros and the cons are very, very complex. both technically and in terms of, you know, who wins and who loses and what your priorities are in terms of the group of people that you most want to benefit. These are big judgment calls, but the point of the tool is it should give you a sort of an easy health check, right? Gets you started.
Got a very good question from Gerard. Gerard, thank you so much for asking this. It's a good question. He thanks you for the presentations and says, how do we integrate children in something, a tool like this? Their preferences are sometimes significantly different from those of men and women.
So you could take the questionnaire, edit out the word women, and put in girls or female children or children in general, and you could go through the same analysis. I would think that the drudgery, you know, increasing work or decreasing work would be very relevant for children. Maybe and access to maybe resources. I don't know if children ever have much access to direct access to the benefits of the sales, but they may or may not get more food, right, depending on who's controlling the food. So I think probably the same questions would have relevance to children. But I guess the other thing I would say is that we're flagging gender issues in this tool, but gender is just one piece of a bigger question, which is, you know, are we including characteristics in the design of our product that the customers are going to find beneficial or acceptable? And that is a question that, you know, one has to ask of any product. We're focused on gender here, but I think your point about the children is bringing out the very important issue that, yeah, you might have a clean bill of health on gender, but there are other types of customer that you might be equally or more concerned about, and you could adapt the tool to run a check for a different group.
Thank you.
Yes, as you're saying, disaggregated. Yeah, Benjamin.
We just have a few minutes left. I would love to hear from anybody in Work Package 1, Cedric and Rita, Olamide, Aditona, Noel, Sarah Mayanja, I know is on the call. If anyone wants to share a few points before we end the webinar, that would be wonderful.
Sarah, is Sarah there? Sarah has a very interesting experience going where she's using stakeholder workshops across the whole value chain to consult. She's sort of going to the horse's mouth and doing a process of consultation around the questions in the questionnaire. So, I mean, that I think is a very creative way of approaching the use of the tool if you don't have the research data at your fingertips. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that, Sarah. It's a great initiative.
It sounds wonderful. So is there any final, Sarah just said she's on the road. Otherwise she would have loved to share. We put you on the spot there, Sarah, as always.
Sorry.
But does anyone have any a final comment or question? Of course, you can reach out to me or Jackie. Deborah Rubin has also been involved in guiding the work of the Gender Working Group. So please do let us know any questions or concerns or suggestions that you may have. Just before perhaps we end, Eglantine, I don't know if you want to take back, but Vivian Polar is on the phone, and I just want to thank her so much for her involvement and working with us on these tools and supporting us with giving some of Jackie's time to us to support us through. Ted says it's nice to hear from an old friend and colleague, Jackie.
The same. Nice to be with you.
Okay, so Eglantine, I'll pass over to you, and thank you so much, Jackie, for everything.
Well, I hope you guys, if you use the tool, we have a chance to share communication with the other people who are piloting and
Absolutely.
and gather these experiences together. That would be terrific.
Indeed. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jacqueline and Laura, for this applied overview of this key decision tool, which is the G+tool. And as you mentioned, it is to be seen as a health check, a check of impacts on gender inequalities. And for this reason, we are very proud in RTV Foods to be applying this tool to our food product profiles, which are our main project outputs, we have to say. So many thanks as well to the Gender Working Group for these studies. We are really looking forward to reading your findings, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to have multidisciplinary discussions on these results. It is our wish. So Jacqueline, many thanks again for accepting the RTV Foods invitation and for allocating time to consolidate the presentation. This is an excellent presentation. We had a very interesting discussion. Thanks, Laura, for this brilliant idea and proposition to have Jacqueline presenting the tool to our scientific community. And thanks all of you for staying with us until now. So on we won't have any webinar in 2 weeks' time because most of us will meet in Benin in person because we have this AfricaYam RTV Foods training or workshop, which is starting on the 19th. So on 19th of November, we won't have any webinar. So we'll meet in a month's time on December the 3rd. And on December the 3rd, we'll have a presentation from Bella, so from Work Package 5 perspective. And Bella will be sharing preliminary results from Tricot, which is applied in NextGen project. And Bella will be presenting how this approach, the Tricot approach, could feed into the Work Package 5 overall methodology for assessment of advanced clones, engaging breeders with RTB users, so processors and consumers. So we'll have a Work Package 5 oriented webinar in a month's time. So thanks again to the speakers. Thanks for all of you for joining, and have a nice weekend.